Hi, welcome to Murf+E Unfiltered, Zero BS Biz Talk. I'm Kathleen Murphy, and I'm here today with my co-host, Mike Sadeghpour. How are you, Mike?
Great, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. It's really a delight to have you here, especially since we go way back in terms of having known each other for so many years. Just for context for people, we went to high school, which is probably, actually, what, like a decade ago or so? You know, at least in my mind.
12 years.
Right, yeah, exactly. Not that long ago.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot in between that time, surprisingly, almost as if it was multiple decades.
Yeah.
So there you go. But when I was thinking about the topic for today, this particular topic really resonated in my mind as something that it was so perfect for you. Just because without getting into too much detail about your background, because I'm sure you'll be sharing aspects about that during the course of our conversation today, but you have been someone that has been on teams and led teams, both sports teams and business teams. And that's not always a combination that you see. And I can't wait to learn more about your experience in those areas and to share with our audience some information about this particular topic. So today's topic is going to be about how to create a winning mentality. And that is both in terms of being on a sports team as well as a business team. And both of us have been on each of those. So we have a few things to say about that. So it'll be kind of fun to talk about that. And as we know, no one likes to lose. But some teams certainly struggle with being able to put wins together. And that includes both business and sports teams. And as a business leader, or if you're a sports coach, we don't always appreciate the fact that there may be coaches and leaders that are struggling with putting a winning team together. So we're going to talk about that. From a team performance perspective, I don't know about you, but I get asked quite often about, well, Kathy, how do you impact team performance? Is it possible to do so? And I always like to say, in a word, yes, it is entirely possible. And one of the other questions is, can you create a winning mentality? And again, that's a big yes to that one. So we'll talk more about that. But there can be some frustration for people when they're on a team, when we know that somebody on your team, whether it's a sports or business team, isn't bringing their A game. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. So I'm curious, in terms of your experience, Mike, is there a method that you have or a system or process that you've gone through to create a winning mentality on the teams that you've led?
Yeah, there's no, A, B, C equals D. But there are some things that you look for that are pretty common on teams that are successful and have sustained excellence, and teams that don't.
Right.
And first and foremost is you have to have talent.
Yes.
You have to have talent, and with that talent, though, then you get into kind of the modeling of the behavior. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference of how people carry themselves, how they prep, how they do the extra work in order to get to where they're trying to get to.
Right. And
then part B of that is kind of the roles and goals. They're clear.
Sure.
So that folks know what lanes they're skating in, but also that there's an environment that use your voice, you have an opinion, but an opinion with a recommendation.
Yes.
And so if you think about that, whether it's in the sports context or if in the business context, there are signs and things that you can look for that you can help start shaping and shifting to work both towards a more, I would say, more consistent kind of delivery of what they're doing, and over time you'll win. Mm-hmm. And folks always ask, when I'm doing these panels or talks, it's like, well, what's the difference?
Right, right.
And it's a fine line. So if both are pretty good, it gets into the details. Mm-hmm. And the little things add up.
Okay.
Right? And it's the thoroughness of those little things over time that are the difference of winning and losing, because in any kind of competition, you can play really hard, do really well, but you didn't win.
Right.
And that's when you got to ask yourself, well, what's the audit say?
Right.
And I think sports teams do that more often, and business teams don't do it as thoroughly.
Right.
And as open around, well, why did we or did we not accomplish the goal or win that particular opportunity that we were looking to?
The postmortem that gets talked about, that sometimes I find that sports teams will do that almost to a point of it being excruciating,
Yes.
where people, you could see them getting really uncomfortable in terms of, can we stop talking about this, please? But that sometimes has to be done in order to not have something just repeated that was undesirable in terms of impacting the performance. And I wish that in business, more teams actually did postmortems, particularly on the sales side of the house, right? They don't always do that. You lose a deal and you just go, oh, all right, and it's not talked about. It's just big L, big zero comes up for that particular opportunity. And that's no fun for anybody. So in terms of your experience with teams, do you feel like there's ever been a time where you've had to single somebody out, or you've noticed that maybe somebody that you depended upon for attitude, let's just say, had some kind of a shift in their behavior or their mentality, and that then severely impacted or noticeably impacted the team performance? And what did you do in that situation?
Yeah,
if that happened?
yes, it has. I've actually been guilty of it myself
Oh, okay. All
in
right.
times. And I think that to your point about the win-loss, back to that for a second with the audit. Why did we win? Why did we lose? And I think the uncomfortableness, it's changed, right? 20 years ago, we didn't know what we didn't know about people and their emotions and how they digest information and how you deliver it.
Right.
And so a lot of this winning mentality and the culture that goes with that is really the leaders, it's how they deliver it.
Yes.
Right? What's in it for the person that you're working with to help them succeed? Because no one shows up and says, hey, I want to fail.
No.
Or I don't want to bring my A game.
Correct.
But that said, you have to hold people accountable, yourself included. And so how do you do that when someone doesn't bring their A game or is starting to shift, or their attitude may be starting to go more towards the negative? And I think all of us know this, we've experienced it, is that emotions are contagious. And negative emotions just spread. And I think that I would typically sit with someone one-on-one if they were kind of going down that track and show examples, but ask, what were you thinking here? Where are you?
Right.
What do you want to accomplish? How do you think you're going to get there? And they'll tell you. And you'll start to see when you start, feeding back to them, here's what I heard you say.
Right.
And they'll be like, I said that, or here's what I did. And I think for me, that's what I've seen the shift now. Mm-hmm. And people want, regardless of whatever team they're on, business or athletics, they want to know you care.
They sure do.
They want to know that you're invested in their development. Mm-hmm. And then they want to be part of something. Mm-hmm. They want to be part of whatever that is. And if they have that 3 ingredients, it really will help you accelerate that. But that's my experience. What about you?
So my experience is absolutely leveraging off of what you're talking about. And I take a slightly different approach because I start with self-awareness for the teams, independent of whether they're a sports team or a business team. And it starts at the top. Mm-hmm. If the leader isn't invested in being open to their self-awareness development, then I'm going to run into some challenges. But let's just say, for conversation's sake, that they are. Typically, they are. There are occasions when they're not. But I start with making sure that they are aware of who they present themselves to be to the world, and then to their teams, and then how are they leveraging that information. So I'm a Gallup Strengths coach, so we start out with usually focusing on their top 5, because that gives me plenty to work with for the leaders that I work with, independent of, again, whether it's sports or business. And so I take them through a process in a system of getting them to appreciate and understand what their own strengths are, because I have a firm belief that without that knowledge, they can't be as impactful as a leader unless they know themselves really well. So how can you expect somebody that doesn't know themselves really well to comfortably and appreciably do a really good job of being a leader if, in fact, they don't know who they are? So once they understand who they are, what makes them tick, what makes them motivated, or what their demotivators are, I then start working with their teams and run through a similar process. And then we do something what's called a team strengths reveal, and everyone finds out what their strengths are. And this is an incredibly bonding experience for the teams that I work with, because of the fact that they then find out that they have things in common that they might not know about, where they typically haven't in the past. maybe had a conversation about like, oh, Mike, I didn't know that you had futuristic as one of your strengths.
Yeah,
Just making this up, of course. But, and then they wouldn't normally have that kind of conversation. So it leads to deeper and meaningful relationships, which is really important to cement the team dynamics coming together. Because I don't know about you, but it's been my experience that if the team dynamics aspect isn't necessarily also addressed from the leadership componentry sort of system down and then spread out, and you're not continuously working on this, you can't just be, let's have one activity and we're done and we're good. It doesn't work that way. Has that been something that you've seen in terms of a challenge, that if the leaders don't really appreciate who they are, that can negatively impact perhaps some of the other performance outcomes that they're expecting to obtain?
Oh my God, yeah. And I find it interesting for you to be able to sit with leaders and they will go through the Strengths Finder. I find there's still quite a few that I know what I am, and most of us don't. And also how they come across,
Right.
and what their team is made up of.
Yes.
And it's in sales, it's a real dilemma that I think has not been addressed, which is if you think about the folks that are in sales, in my work, I've seen ADHD, I've seen executive functioning issues, and that's the same group that you're asking, who are phenomenal with clients, who are very quick, who can bring clarity and simplify. Those are superpowers.
Yes.
And you're asking them to be very organized in their CRM, their pursuit plan. It's like a battery cable on their brains. And
Right.
from the top, it keeps coming, versus asking the question, how do we get this group that has these unique traits to flourish?
Yes.
And then let's arm them with what those are and take away the negatives for them.
Right. Set them up for success. Focus them on the strengths that they're good at versus, to your point, having them be concerned about things that they're never going to be probably an expert in. Say,
Right.
for example, perhaps you're asking one of your salespeople to do analytics based on the breakdown of their performance, and that's not their like, specialty area. Instead, what would be a better approach would be to partner them with somebody that does that just extremely well. Maybe it's somebody else on the team, maybe it's the boss, maybe it's somebody else within the organization. And you use that same approach of not necessarily ignoring deficits in that people have, but instead focusing them on taking their strengths from being good to amazing, which is what I do. That's my job. So when I get brought in, especially to take a look at teams that may be underperforming, and I've certainly worked with a few of those, I also get brought in to help exceptional teams just take it to the next level, which is a lot of fun too, because there's always room for growth, as you might agree. Have you been in a situation where you've worked with an exceptional team that they're an exceptional team for a reason, and maybe share some insights in terms of like what kept them at that level?
Yeah, I've had teams, their record is way better than they are.
Ah.
And that's misleading. So
Oh.
and so having a standard of like understanding what good looks like. And I find that in business and in athletics, they don't really have a descriptor other than the number.
Yes.
So if we make our profit margins, we make our number, we're really good. It's like, no. Because if you actually look at, in the business world, productivity per head count, let's say,
Sure.
and the distribution's loaded to a small percentage that's carrying the rest.
The 80-20 rule.
Yeah, and then if you go on the other side of it and you look at the athletics, and whatever team that might be, everyone has a job and a responsibility. But when you have talent, things can get masked. You hear winning ugly. And I've been with teams that really thought that they were much better than they were. And when you actually look at the tape and what they're trying to get done, that's that level set, that's that audit. But again, it's like, well, how do we get better? And I tie that in with one of my favorite books, and it's a short YouTube, this Brian Johnston TV. He's about 13 minutes. He breaks down the 5 pillars of the All Blacks, the great rugby team of New Zealand,
Yes.
and why they're the
fan.
winningest organization in the world. And the author is James Kerr, and he goes into detail. But their culture is non-negotiable. And my favorite pillar is they play in stadiums like the Patriots do, 75,000 people. After they finish with the press, the players clean the locker room.
Wow.
And they call it sweeping the floor. And it's to stay humble.
Sure.
And so they have these 5 pillars that they follow. And so those are non-negotiable. And that's sustained excellence.
Right.
Right? So I'll flip it back on you. So that you have this methodology you use. And I know just in some of our conversations, you're working with different teams that are here, here, and here. What are some of your observations?
So let's take an example of, because a lot of people like to hear about the ugly and the dirty work that we sometimes do that we can't always talk about, but I'll share some insights in terms of one of the teams, happened to be a sales team that I was working with, and I'll give a quick overview of a sports team also that was struggling, that was sort of at the bottom as well. So this particular sales team, they hadn't hit their number for 10 months. They were just beside themselves. They couldn't figure out what was going wrong. They tried everything. So they finally approached me and said, we think that you might be able to help us. Can you come in? So basically, the challenge that they were having was that their pairing of how they organize their business. So they were putting 3 people together to work in these like little micro teams. And the teams that they put together were just like the worst food and wine pairings that you could ever imagine in life. So I looked at these based off of what their strengths were and said, okay, are you willing to make some changes? And they said, we'll do whatever at this point. We're open. So I made some changes, pretty extreme changes to their teams. I actually even suggested to some people, I suggested to the leader on that team that there were people on the team that probably belonged in a different role. They really didn't belong on the sales team, that was really going to be detrimental to them, and that they would be better off if they shifted a couple of the people to a different team and had fewer people that could concentrate, that did their job really well, and allow them to perform at a different level. So making some tweaks like that just sent them to a different place entirely in terms of performance. And they hit their number for the first time after 4 weeks of me working with them. Continued to stay with them. They continued to hit their numbers for 2 more months. And at that point, I said, look, I'm not in the business of just staying here and watching you with your training wheels be on your bike. You don't need them anymore. I've taught you how to ride your bike. You're good. You know how to reach me. So they went on to continue to perform based on how I set them up. And from time to time, they would check back with me when certain people maybe moved off the team, and they'd just recalibrate if they needed to with the teams that they're putting together. A sports team that I was working with, they were really struggling with reaching winning numbers. They just would get close and they just couldn't get there. And they couldn't figure out what the sort of formula was to help them to get there. And many times I find that what is going on is that mentality of, it's unfortunate, they were having some people, and there weren't that many people that were impacting the mindsets of others. You talked about contagious, say, positivity, or contagious, we can get this done and make this happen. There were people that were contagious in the opposite spectrum, and they were negatively impacting the rest of the team. So when we identified who those people were, we course corrected with them to figure out, did you even really want to be on this team? Is this where you really want to be? And have them think long and hard about, why are you here? Because most people, especially in the sports world, don't typically say, let's lose today.
Yeah, right.
That just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But yet it was. I mean, it was almost blatant. And so when I worked with the coaches and had some of these people called out in terms of, do you really understand the impact that you're having on the rest of the team? They didn't. And they felt badly, and that wasn't their intention at all. So we fixed. Actually, one person decided to leave the team.
Sure.
And the other person that was a culprit completely changed their tune, and then became a really wonderful contributor to the team, having that winning mentality. And then they went on to start winning again, and to have that winning mentality. To work together the way they were supposed to. So that was a delight. That was great to see. And that didn't take that long to impact that scenario either. That was a matter of really a couple of weeks of helping to turn that sort of bad situation into a good one.
Yeah, and I mean, I love hearing that because, you know, the best teams I've ever been associated with, the players really kind of hold each other accountable.
Yes, I love that.
And that's
Yes.
really when you have the players, the coaches are there and organizing practice and all the other good things. But in that world, the players and whatever endeavor it is, they police what goes on in a way that's like, these are the standards.
Right, and not just the captains. Right?
No,
or
no.
not just the named leaders in the organization,
No.
the directors or VPs or whoever they might be
Right.
title-wise. Right.
Yeah, I had a customer, they were very successful, been together a long time, but they were not stepping up, and they expected the owner, and it was really at the next level. And until they decided, and they came clean, kind of with where it's very similar, that's when it started changing again. And I think that there's a lot of people aren't aware that, you know, how we digest in whatever situation we're in, how we actually digest it, shape, and whatever story we're telling ourselves, that creates a lens.
It does.
And that lens is how we operate, and that lens also kind of shapes your emotions, and your emotions are the most powerful thing we have, and that dictates behavior. And that's where, you know, you get in the habits about how you see and digest things, and it's tied to optimism and resilience, but you look at these people in business, people that are successful, sport, it doesn't matter the endeavor. There's an incredible similarities in how they think about setbacks, that they're temporary. And they ask themselves, what do I need to do to get better or to overcome that? Or this is something that I want to accomplish, so I know it's going to be hard, it's going to take a long time. And that's the new term now with grit. It's not new with Angela Duckworth, but the ability to stay with a difficult task over a long period of time, which is pretty much everything.
Yes, right.
And then the last part I'll say is, a lot of folks aren't familiar with like the growth mindset research on not being perfect and worried about how others judge you, but more on the process of getting better.
That's right.
And those are the folks that, like, I don't know about you, but I watched the Actors Studio.
Oh,
and they have all these famous actors come in,
okay.
everything from Paul Newman to Michelle Pfeiffer I watched the other night. And they all talk about mastering their craft, and it never ends.
I love that.
And I just thought, and all the actors, Dustin Hoffman, it's Terry Hatcher, they're never done.
Never done. And I think that's, like, I'm going to just jump off of that in terms of commenting a little bit further about that, because I find that some of the problems lie in both, for sports coaches and leaders, the fact that they don't have a growth mindset, an open mindset. They're not continuously investing in themselves. They're either their self-awareness or their understanding of the fact that things have changed in this world that we live in, and they can't just keep operating on the same principles that supported them well, even a few years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Just, it's not going to work. This is a topic that I think we could discuss for, I believe, years to come. We could have multiple shows on this, so I'll look forward to, you know, discussing this with you further. And we didn't even get to really have a chance to talk about the tips that I have for people. So I'm gonna hold that back for people, so that if they're interested in the tips relating to me sharing those with somebody, I'm going to have them get in touch with me if that's something that they would like as sort of a parting gift, if you will, for listening in today. But in terms of just appreciating whether in fact a winning mentality is sort of innate or not, if you had to, you know, if you had to like explain whether in fact really succinctly you think that it is or it isn't, do you believe that it's innate, having a winning mentality, or it's not? And is there maybe a middle ground?
I think there are probably a few with innate, but it gets challenged. If you read and research really successful people, they have the downs, they've been in really tough places, but they find a way to get back up. That's the piece. Now, because of all the research and the science now of sports psychology and resilience, there's the cheat notes on how to get better at it and shorten that span.
Sure.
But the ability to win, you see it in tennis, where the difference of the number 1 player and the number 20 player, you can't see it.
Right.
It's the 1 point.
Right.
that
Right.
decides, right?
That's right.
The closing.
Yes.
It's the one play at the highest level of pressure. It's the one salesperson who can close the multi-million-dollar and keep their wits about them.
Yes.
So there is some of that, and people who like to lean into failure.
True.
Right, like
Right.
well, a lot of people
Right.
avoid it. They don't
Oh,
like confrontation.
Without a doubt. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like right. By the way, I'm reading Wisdom Whisperer, your book.
My book? You
Yes.
are? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Thank
And
you.
and so I'm constantly trying to figure out, like, one of my blind spots is I'm not a good brander or marketer. I don't know how to tell my story very effectively.
I think
See, like I know I like my content and what I talk about, but I like my story and what I do.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do. It's sort of like if you had to design your own clothes, would you know what style would be best suited for yourself? I would be terrible at that. No, I couldn't do that. So I can appreciate what you're saying. But I want to thank you for being here today. This is just, the time absolutely flew by beyond my imagination, and this was so much fun having an opportunity to talk to you. I'd love for you to come back and talk with me again. And I just want to thank everybody for being here, and please come back to see us on Murf+E Unfiltered, Zero BS Biz Talk, and have a great day, everybody.